Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the live stream here from the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. I'm Kyle Dalton, the Membership and Development Coordinator. Joining me is Jake, Director of Interpretation. I'm gesturing this way, but I'm not actually sure if it's going to show up on screen like that, if they'll see it. We want to thank you all for joining us. We're talking about Fort Fisher, the Battle of Fort Fisher, and battlefield medical care there during today's virtual happy hour. It is a virtual happy hour. Drink if you got them. I know a lot of you at work. Don't get yourselves in trouble. But Jake and I are going to be enjoying some on-the-clock beverages. Jake, what are you drinking today?
Well, I am having, we talked about this a little bit last time. I'm having the original, the OG canister IPA from Antietam Brewery out in Washington County, Maryland, very close to the Antietam battlefield, just north of there in Hagerstown. We'll throw a pitch in that we have double canister IPA that's going to be coming out from them. There you go. Look at it. It's beautiful.
I was just at the brewery this afternoon. They gave me a can just for this program. We're going to be making some announcements soon. Keep an eye on our channel because we'll be selling this out of our gift shop. You can come to the museum and buy double canister IPA.
So Kai, what do you have? Other than do you just have the beer today? You didn't do the old fashioned?
I'm starting with the beer.
You're starting with the beer. Gotcha.
It depends on how long this all takes, but I do have a backup, and that is the old fashioned, the original cocktail, a true American cocktail. Whiskey with superfine sugar, a little bit of bitters, Angostura, and orange in this case, and it's stirred in the glass.
Excellent. I love Kyle always has the fanciest drinks, and I will say from experience is a great bartender slash cocktail maker slash cocktail artist, if you will. He makes some awesome drinks in that amazing kitchen that he has there in historic Frederick.
Yeah, I am broadcasting from Kemp Hall. It is my apartment, but it also was very briefly the legislature for the state of Maryland at the beginning of the Civil War. This is where they voted against secession, actually a couple of times. And it's also from here, or rather outside of here, that the secessionist legislators were arrested. So it's a historic building. It's an important moment in American history, but so too is our topic today. Before we jump into that, I do want to make a quick pitch here. We are a private nonprofit. We offer these videos for free. You don't have to support us if you don't have the means or simply it's a little too tight right now. I know we're all coming off the holiday season, but if you got something to spare and you like these videos, you enjoy the topics that we bring to you, consider supporting us. In the description below, you'll see a link to our website, civilwarmed.org. And there you can become a member. Members get great benefits. You get 10% off in our gift shop, free admission to all 3 sites, a subscription to our journal and newsletter. You get an extra coupon on top of that, which you can use to buy double canister IPA. There's some great benefits that come with membership, and it really does help us keep these programs coming. Last year was a banner year for membership. You really showed up in a tough year when it was tough for all of you and tough for us. So that was great. Thank you all so much for supporting us. Those of you that are members, if you'd like to become a member, check out that link below. Having said that, also a couple other quick notes. I can't see the questions. I can't see the comments. Jake can see the comments. I can't. So if I'm talking and you have a question, go ahead and type it. Jake will let me know if there's a pertinent question, and we will try to answer all the questions we can by the end. So do feel free to ask away. Just recognize that I might not get back to you immediately. And also, neither of us are medical professionals. We're not nurses. We're not doctors. We're not EMTs. We are historians. We're going to be talking about history today. Nothing we say should be taken as medical advice. So let's get the show on the road. We are talking about the Battle of Fort Fisher today. It's not as well known as a lot of the big battles we talk about, Antietam, for example, but it's a really important one. Jake, could you tell us a little bit about the Battle of Fort Fisher and why we should care?
Absolutely. This is one battle that I know that I was very excited to talk about and also to learn a little bit more about. I will say, and those of you who may have watched previous videos, especially my Stones River video that I did back on New Year's Day, you'll remember that we have been trying to focus a little bit more on the more, I don't want to say obscure battles, but ones that don't get a lot of play, especially in the Eastern theater of the conflict. For so long, the museum, our institution, but also just kind of Civil War history in general, especially along the East Coast, really focuses heavily on what happens in Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And our museum's interpretation has also gone along with that. So we have been trying, and 2021, our mantra is going to really be to talk about some of these other battlefields, talk about what's going on in the West, what's going on along the coast, talk about naval medicine some more, talk more about women's roles in Civil War medicine, African Americans' roles in Civil War medicine, and then head out to places like the far West. We got some great video content about things going on in Nevada that I know that Kyle is working on. So we're really excited to kind of boost this YouTube channel. Thank you all so much for coming on over here. And Fort Fisher seemed like a great place to start. In 1865, and battles going on at the end of the Civil War are really fascinating to look at and have a lot of importance that doesn't always get talked about. And Fort Fisher and the fighting around Wilmington and the battle for Wilmington is really, really important. And that's what we're going to look at today. I'm going to go and share my screen now, or attempt to. So let me, if you'll bear with me here as I get up my Zoom box here. There we go. It's always a little slow, I feel like. There we go. Sorry about that. Thanks for bearing with us. All right, so let's dive into this. So Fort Fisher, talk a little bit about the kind of origins of this story. Fort Fisher was, by the end of the Civil War, 1864, early 1865, one of the last remaining thorns in the side of the U.S. Navy's effort to suffocate the Confederacy via naval blockade. I'm sure many of you out there are familiar with the Anaconda Plan, Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan in 1861. The snake meant to starve out the Confederacy, to cut it off from the rest of the world. That did not become a truly effective strategy until midway through the Civil War, as the blockade becomes more effective, as the United States Navy builds better and more effective ships to monitor the coast of the southern seacoast, and eventually starts closing down seaports.
I do think that there's, because my big thing is maritime history. There is an argument to be said, like, what does effective mean? Because even when it was on paper, I think like midway through 1862, commercial traffic had already been split in half for the Confederacy. And it's not that they had a really effective blockade; it's that people just stopped risking it.
Yes.
So they didn't necessarily need those ships. I'd say the Anaconda Plan was a little more effective beforehand, even though it wasn't actually there.
Absolutely. We've had this discussion before when we talked about, actually going back to talking about coffee. We actually talked a little bit about this, about how the blockade really increases the price of shipping anything, because all of these ships that are trying to get through the blockade are insured, and the cost of everything is going to go up as a result. So absolutely. But the Wilmington and Fort Fisher, they are going to become one of the last remaining of the open ports in the South. And it's because, in part, of the shape of the land and how in this case, the Cape Fear River comes into the Atlantic Ocean off of Wilmington, North Carolina, that is going to help to kind of solidify this as one of the last remaining open ports of the Confederacy. And blockade runners are going to be using this port very effectively throughout the Civil War, bringing in crucial supplies that are needed by the Confederate Army, be that arms, be that other forms of supplies needed by the war effort, as well as, and I know we've discussed this in videos from the museum in the past, medical supplies that would also be coming through the blockade. Some of the most valuable things that can be sent through the blockade are those medical supplies.
Oh, yeah.
So this particular city, Wilmington, and Fort Fisher guarding it are considered nearly impregnable, and are left as basically the last open port, because the U.S. Navy and U.S. Army go after the other ports that are a little bit easier nuts to crack than we see with Wilmington. Wilmington itself, as you can see from this plan, this is a map from the Library of Congress, and this shows kind of the fortifications. And it's not just Fort Fisher. That's important to mention, that Fort Fisher is but one in a series of fortifications that defends the opening of the Cape Fear River upwards, northwards to Wilmington, North Carolina, which was 21 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. The river is lined by fortifications at its mouth, as well as it heads northward towards Wilmington. There are numerous fortifications designed to protect the city both from naval attack and from attacks on land or by amphibious assault, which is ultimately going to be what happens, that the U.S. Army is going to work in conjunction with the U.S. Navy to occupy and take this place, take this location. So a little bit of a history on Fort Fisher itself. There are fortifications and arms put in place in 1861 at the beginning of the conflict to protect Wilmington. It is understood that this is a crucially important and strategic location, that Wilmington is, because of the nature of the waterways and the way it opens onto the Atlantic, it is understood that this is going to be a crucial spot to be defended. And so the fortification kind of at the mouth of the river, of the Cape Fear River, is going to be named for a North Carolina officer killed during the Battle of Bull Run. So Fort Fisher gets attached to it right in 1861. And ultimately, it's not going to be until 1862 that the defenses really come together. And this goes, again, back to the idea that we have in 1861 that this is going to be a short conflict. There's not a lot of investment put into defensive fortifications in the first year of the war, because people don't think it's going to be a long conflict. We don't think this is going to be a long-term situation. And so there is not a lot of investment in things like defenses. But by 1862, it is understood that the cities like Wilmington are going to be crucial, and and Confederates need to protect them.
Now, did they build like permanent medical facilities along with that? Was there a hospital that went with the fort?
Yeah, so it's not on this map, but there is a kind of centrally located hospital between many of these fortifications that is going to be kind of the hospital, which is mostly treating, because Wilmington is largely spared from large-scale actions until the end of 1864. Most of those that are going to be treated in kind of these garrison hospitals are going to be those who come down with illnesses, come down with disease. And disease is rampant during the Civil War. 2/3 of those that die in the conflict die of disease. And so that is going to, those hospitals, that hospital in particular, Garrison Hospital, is going to be where those patients are treated. There's also hospitals in Wilmington itself. There's going to be hospitals in the city. And this is going to play a role, and I'll get to this a little bit later in the presentation, about a yellow fever epidemic that broke out in the city in 1862, in the city itself, but also is going to affect all of those in the garrison defending the city. So it goes from a rather flimsy set of fortifications, if you even want to call it that, in 1861, to by 1862, the Confederate military authorities are going to invest quite a bit of money, of time, into creating fortifications. This is a photograph that shows what some of those fortifications look like. I want to say at this point that those who constructed these fortifications were enslaved workers. This is commonplace for the Confederate Army. They used enslaved African Americans to construct fortifications like this. You see this not only in North Carolina, but also throughout the war zone. Going back to 1861 and fighting near Fortress Monroe in Virginia, where the first so-called contraband refugees from slavery are seeking shelter in Union lines. This is very commonplace during the Civil War and is common as well at Fort Fisher. So unlike coastal fortifications that we see in pre-war coastal fortifications that you see in Charleston, Fort Sumter, and Fort Moultrie, you see Fort Pulaski, some of these other fortifications that date to before the Civil War, that they were made of masonry, made of brick, and other man-made materials. But if you're familiar with what happens at Fort Sumter and these other fortifications. They are fairly easily, comparatively, easy to tear down that brick and masonry with large shells and the weaponry that's being used during the Civil War as the conflict worsens. And so what these military minds and engineers come up with is just use the materials you have on hand. Use the earth itself, sand and rock and dirt and trees, and make a fortification that actually can absorb many of those heavy shells that are going to be used by guns on shore, and more importantly, by the guns that are going to be used by ships of the U.S. Navy that are going to grow increasingly more powerful as the war goes on. So elsewhere, all through the Civil War, major seaport after major seaport is going to fall in the Confederacy. New Orleans, Mobile, Alabama, all of these cities are going to be closed to naval traffic or outright captured. And
New
so
Orleans
this is going to
being a huge one.
Yes, and so this is going to make Wilmington more and more important. And so by the end of 1864, after Mobile falls and that port is closed, all eyes turn to Wilmington. And even the Confederate government, Confederate military authorities realize this. But there's not a major effort to further protect Fort Fisher and the defenses around Wilmington because of the nature of the war at the end of 1864. There are simply not enough men to defend the Confederacy as it is beginning to implode on itself, as Union armies are successful everywhere, marching through Georgia, sieging Robert E. Lee at Petersburg. There are simply not enough men to defend all of these fortifications that are necessary. And so this is going to become a problem in the defense of Wilmington and the defense of Fort Fisher. So the first assault that's going to come at Fort Fisher is going to be in December of 1864. And this is going to be under General Benjamin Butler and Admiral David Dixon Porter. It's going to be a combined effort, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, to assault and try to take this incredibly strong series of defenses at the mouth of the Cape Fear River. U.S. Navy guns are going to open up on Fort Fisher relentlessly, giving cover at the end of December of 1864 to the landing of about 1,000 U.S. Army soldiers. That attack ultimately fails pretty spectacularly. A grand fizzle, if you will. It fizzles to nothing, and Butler is ultimately relieved of the command of this expedition. A second larger assault is going to come in January of 1865. And this is where we're going to do more of our focus today. More than 50 U.S. Navy ships are going to open a relentless fire on Fort Fisher, one of the, if not the largest bombardments and most continuous bombardment in history to that point, conducted by the U.S. Navy. Under the cover of days-long bombardment, initially 8,000 Union troops are going to be landed near the fort. On the north side of the fort, they're going to cut it off from the other fortifications along the Cape Fear River and from Wilmington itself. And as the bombardment continues, more forces are landed, including U.S. Navy personnel and United States Marines. On January 15th, 1865, these forces are going to attack and overwhelm the Confederate garrison inside the fort. Defenders in a brutal fight, includes some hand-to-hand combat. In a few hours, ultimately, Fort Fisher falls. An example of some of the heavy fighting going on in this particular sketch from the Library of Congress's collection. Fort Fisher is captured. Its garrison is either killed, wounded, and then everyone who is left is captured. And so with that, Fort Fisher falls. The port of Wilmington is closed to the Confederacy. Total casualties from this fight in January going to come in just shy of 3,000 men. About 1,000 of them with the Union forces, and almost 2,000 of the Confederate defenders who will become casualties of, again, wounded, killed, or captured, or in some cases, because of the nature of the bombardment, literally blown apart by some of the weaponry that is being utilized. This battle shows that the Confederacy is really in its last days. Once Wilmington is closed, ultimately fighting is going to continue for the next month. leading up to Wilmington itself, which falls on February 22nd, 1865. The battle shows that the end is nigh for the Confederacy. Their days are extremely numbered because they lose this crucial spot. And I do always want to point out one thing. I wasn't able to get a screenshot of this, unfortunately, but one of my favorite aspects of this battle, in terms of actually how I was originally introduced to it, is that this battle features very prominently in one of my favorite movies of all time, the 2012 film Lincoln. This battle and that movie shows how crucial this battle is in the timeline of the Civil War. It's often overshadowed by what happens next with the fall of Charleston in early February of 1865. And also leading the events that take place afterwards around Petersburg, Virginia, and then ultimately to Appomattox, or even battling that's going to go on further west in North Carolina, Battle of Bentonville, some of these other engagements that are going to overshadow what happens at Fort Fisher. But this place is crucially important, but also gives us a lot of fascinating medical stories to talk about as well, including those that come from this kind of combination of U.S. Navy, U.S. Army operation, amphibious assault. And so Kyle's going to talk a little bit about that and do some comparisons and looking at some, always having some great quotes as well. I'm going to look a little bit more specifically here. So I'll stop my share and throw it over to Kyle.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really, when Fort Fisher, even though Fort Fisher is such an important battle, it's always overshadowed by those big ones, by Gettysburg, by Antietam, by Shiloh. You know, it's not up there with those, even though strategically it is easily as important as those. It is the death row. When Wilmington falls, that's the game. The fat lady starts to sing. You cannot get supplies from overseas anymore. And that is huge. That is really critical to the fall of the Confederacy. But often it's not remembered for that. Often what it's remembered for is the Naval Brigade. It is this weird moment where there is a big terrestrial battle and the Navy's there. Not just there, but they're in huge numbers and acting as infantry. It's a really strange moment in Civil War military history, and it's usually remembered for that, for being what in the 18th century they would call a conjunct expedition, and in modern times we'd call a combined operation. It's an amphibious assault by Navy and Marine personnel that is augmenting a Army force that is already ashore. It is such an unusual moment in Civil War history for that reason, and it often gets brought up because of that. And I think it has a certain charge the light brigade quality to it, because disproportionately, the sailors and Marines are the ones who are suffering. Disproportionately, they're the ones being killed. And I don't remember the exact timeline for it, but it has something to do with like when they launched their attack. It was supposed to be like a diversionary attack. Am I right, Jake, on that? Your microphone's off.
Yeah, I'm here. What was that question? Sorry.
So the Navy and Marines, the sailors and the Marines, when they charged, that was supposed to be like a diversionary attack for the Army.
Yeah, it's multiple. It's always important. Remember, when we talk about Civil War tactics, that this idea of attacking on multiple fronts is going to be crucial. So you see this oftentimes. And yes, I mean they're a much smaller force. The 8,000 man force that initially lands is the main event, but the idea is to put pressure on multiple points, especially when you have a fixed defense like a large earthen fort. It's going to play a crucial role. So I wouldn't say it's diversionary. I would say it's more so a you're trying to get multiple fronts. You're trying to pin people in place. Is going to be crucial there.
And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the Navy launched their attack either too early or the Army launched their attack too late, but the sailors and Marines started attacking first. right?
As for specific timing, I believe that's the case. Again, medical historians here,
Right. Yeah.
medical historians. We are much more focused on the aftermath of battle.
Right.
I know Becky Sawyer is from the Fort Fisher State Historic Site, which I'm about to put the information for that location. They're the ones who tell the story on the site there.
And she gave us some great sources today too.
Yes, and we are going to get into some of those sources here in
Yes,
just
we
a
are.
bit. So, so Becky, I know you're watching with us, and thank you so much for doing that. If you have any feedback, I know you already gave some feedback to some of the comments that I made. Really appreciate that. So feel free to chime in and add to the conversation. Those of you who are also commenting, I see lots of you hanging out with us today. Thank you for doing that. We can't always see the questions, so we're going to get to those questions at the end of the program. But always like to have a lively chat going on. So yeah. Kyle, back over to you.
And really the only reason I was like worrying about this timing and stuff is that it may have contributed to the outsized casualties for the Navy and the Marines on the Union side, in that they attacked. But regardless of the reasoning, there is a disproportionate number of wounded and dead among the Navy and the Marines. Some of them are only carrying revolvers and cutlasses. I don't know how much of the force was made up of that, because I know the Marines are carrying bayonets and rifles and stuff. But nonetheless, a lot of them are killed and wounded during the battle. In fact, there's a surgeon who falls. This is pretty unusual in Civil War combat, even for big battles. In the Army, it's really unusual when a surgeon or a hospital steward or someone like that falls in battle. But it does happen here. I'm going to share a brief quote. There we go. This is from the original report of the battle, in which the death of Assistant Surgeon William Longshaw Jr. is reported. Of course, I'll leave that up there for y'all to read. But what happened was he was busy working on a sailor, and a short distance away, there was a small group of Marines that were behind what they call a hillock, maybe a sand dune. They were laying down rifle fire on the fortifications. One of these Marines fell. He went to try and save him, and while he was doing so, he was hit with a grape shot through the head and killed instantly. Again, this is pretty unusual in Civil War combat. Surgeons aren't usually that close to the fighting. Assistant surgeons a little bit more so, but nonetheless, you don't see them often falling in combat. This is one of the ways that we can get into how it's a little different between the Navy and the Army. Because, and actually James McPherson does a good job of laying this out in the beginning of his book, War on the Waters, his history of the Civil War naval combats. He talks about how it's different from studying the Army, and not just in, well, one of them's afloat and one of them's on shore, but by nature, naval combat is indiscriminate. There are no non-combatants, really. If you're on the ship, you can be killed by combat. One example that I think of is in the Battle of Gettysburg. There's like, 170, 180,000 people involved. One surgeon falls in that entire battle. Collateral damage, he's hit by a shell, mortally wounded. But in the USS Keystone State, she's chasing a blockade runner, and the blockade runner gets a lucky shot, punches her boiler open, and kills both the assistant surgeon and the surgeon steward within minutes. And that's like, 100 guys on that ship. It's, even though we're dealing with much smaller numbers in naval combat in the Civil War, it is necessarily indiscriminate. People die fast. And you are more likely to die than be wounded in naval combat. And the opposite is true in terrestrial combat. If you're ashore, you're way more likely to be wounded than die. This gives us another opportunity to show the way things are different through this one.
While you're bringing that up, Kyle,
yes.
I don't know, do you have any sea shanties you want to sing for us today? Since sea shanties have become the popular thing these days.
I was talking to Jake about this before we started. So Maritime history is my thing. This is my jam. I am here for this. I used my first museum job was the Maritime Museum of San Diego. Actually, the ship that I spent the most time on, the Star of India, was built during the Civil War. It was built in 1863 on the Isle of Man. She was a British merchantman, and she was intended to sail to India to get cotton because they couldn't get it from the South anymore. And that was my first job, was working on this ship. And with their whole fleet of ships, I maintain a blog about sailors in the 18th century. I have little model ships that I build. This is my jam. I am here for this. So having said that, again, it is a different thing. It's a different beast entirely when you're talking about naval combat. This is a great comparative illustration of that through stark statistics. In the Navy and Marines on the right, as you can see, you are more likely to die in battle than be wounded. And this is because oftentimes you're dealing with iron ships. Some of these ships, there's a couple of examples of monitors that strike torpedoes, what we would today call sea mines, and they sink within seconds. Battle of Mobile Bay, there's an ironclad that sinks in 10 seconds and takes almost its entire crew to the bottom. The Hunley, the famous submarine, took 3 of its crews to the bottom. There's no watertight compartments. They're very heavy. It's not that hard to sink these things. And it takes everyone with it. And in those cases where the ships do survive, all it takes is one lucky shot. The shot can go through the boiler, release steam through the whole ship and scald people. They inhale the steam and are scalded inside out. I mean, there's not often combat in Civil War Navy as the way we think of it, ship to ship. That doesn't happen all that often. But when it does happen, it is lethal and indiscriminate. It comes for everyone. And that's, again, you see the differences here. Another interesting thing, too, is the differences in disease. Death by disease and accident is way higher, 3 times higher, more than 3 times higher in the Army than it is in the Navy. And that is, there's a lot of different reasons for that. One is that they actually did medical screenings. For the Navy, they did actually really inspect people that came in. But also the populations they're drawing from are more urban. They are often people who've already been exposed to a lot of diseases in a way that for the Army, they often have not. But again, you're seeing some differences here. It is a very different beast from one to the next. And for some of these sailors, Fort Fisher, even if they've been in the Navy for a year and a half or longer, this is their first experience of battle. Much of Navy life was sitting offshore and waiting. Trying to catch blockade runners and often failing. They're just sitting around. And so when they do finally see combat, it can be pretty shocking for them. A great example of that was actually shared by Becky. Thank you again for sharing those sources with us. A fellow by the name of William Hawkins. I think he's an engineer, but he's certainly enlisted, perhaps drafted. It's a little unclear to me, on the USS Pontusuk. I don't know how to pronounce that. But he talks about how he wanted to see combat in the Navy. And he'd previously been in the Army. But he was kind of shocked by what he saw. And later in his journal, he writes, or his letters, his diary, he writes about how shocking this really was for him. Let's see if I can bring that up. Here we go. There we are. The enemy's dead and wounded still lie in the works uncared for, but they will receive all possible attention. He went ashore after the battle, second battle of Fort Fisher, and he saw the bodies in the works. He saw the Confederate dead and wounded left behind. This also fits with something that I bring up in one of our blog posts that we'll post in the comments later. Something I call the triage of allegiance. And that is that you always treat your own side's wounded before you treat the wounded of the other side. And in such a mass casualty event as this, that means a lot of people are getting left behind for longer than maybe you would like. It's a shocking thing. It's hard to see for everybody involved, but they're still kind of learning how to deal with mass casualty events. Even this late in the war, they're still dealing with events that have so many dead and wounded that it overwhelms the system. So again, naval combat is a little bit different when they take it ashore. In this instance, especially when you're attacking a fortification where there's a lot of artillery going back and forth, it's also similarly indiscriminate. And they're seeing some pretty shocking scenes in all of this. Now, I've talked a bit already about how naval medical treatment and naval trauma care has been different from the Army. But I think we need to talk a little bit about medical care ashore in the wake of this battle too. Jake, I think you've got a little bit you can illustrate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to say before I get into my section here, and I think it's a kind of a good note. And we had a meeting earlier today with our executive director, David Price, and he always likes us to make sure that we talk about the basics. And this seems like a good place to mention it, as we've been talking about some of the trauma care, the medicine that is going on both on board ships and ashore. And that is that at this time, there is no understanding of germ theory, that there is increasingly scientific evidence-based medicine, but we're not to many key discoveries. They have not been proven out yet. There is a germ theory, but it is far from proven. Antiseptic surgery in 1865 is being first worked out in Europe, but is not yet and will be basically a decade away from being truly becoming common practice amongst surgeons, especially in the United States. Actually, Kyle's written a fantastic series of blog posts about the development of germ theory and the understanding of disease, but also of the kind of microbial world that you can find on our website. civilwarmed.org/blog.
And while we're patting each other on the back, the whole conclusion of that was that the Civil War really kind of pulled back on our acceptance of germ theory. That like these surgeons were so traumatized by their experience, it made it really hard for them to accept that they could have done something better. They could have prevented further death, and that in fact their actions may have prolonged it. Now, obviously they couldn't have known that they were spreading germs, but they did feel that. It really hurt. And it's not until as Jake argues, the assassination of President Garfield that people start to come around to this idea that like, oh, germs are a real thing. And even though disease is far less dangerous in the Union Navy, it is still a serious concern. There's a lot of disgusting experiences. This quote is great from the book Union Jacks by Michael J. Bennett, a social history of sailors in the Union Navy, about how disgusting life could be on these ships. The cramped spaces, the shared everything. And this is almost doubled down by ironclads. They're more confined. They're really uncomfortable in the summer. This is not a healthy environment. A 3.2% mortality from disease would be inexcusable today, even if it is better than the 10.6 or whatever of the armies.
And I will say we have a question here that I think it's a good point to mention this as I'm about to make this pivot. Was morphine available? Opiates are widely used during the Civil War. That is going to be something that is extremely common. I will say by this stage in the conflict, that opiates are among the most sought after medical supply that the Union forces, the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy has available in large numbers, are giving out millions of doses, but that the Confederacy specifically struggles to get their hands on, mostly because all of this opium is being imported. And because of the nature of the blockade, Wilmington is actually going to be one of the ports where a lot of the opium is being shipped into. So the fact that this is now under assault and blockade runners cannot get in means that when Wilmington is closed, the shipment of opium from outside of the outside the Confederacy basically is going to cease. So that's one
That
of the things that's being fought over here.
Yeah, that's true even earlier in the war. This is a great quote from the assistant surgeon of the 19th Virginia, about how they often didn't have enough medicine. They did, get the stuff that they could, but when they had a surplus, it was often from blockade running. It was often from people getting to Wilmington, getting to whatever port happened to be open. Sometimes even those that were under close blockade, like Charleston. But really, this is the death knell, and this is the reason Fort Fisher is the death knell, because you need this stuff to get through, especially medicine. And once Wilmington falls, I mean, that's the game.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's head on shore, and I'll
Yes.
pull up a photograph here. I have two photographs, one of which was sent to us by Becky, and I appreciate. I'll give her a bigger shout out here in just a second. Let me pull up my screen.
Yeah, I gotta say, these sources, there were so many great sources from Becky. I was just like, oh man, we need to do another video maybe.
Oh yeah. So so this is going to be a photograph from inside Fort Fisher. This is taken by Timothy O'Sullivan, kind of famous Civil War photographer, going to arrive after the fall of Fort Fisher. Going to take pictures inside. So this gives you an idea of what it was like inside Fort Fisher during, that this is the fortification that's going to hold out into January of 1865. But so we mentioned earlier, and Becky kind of confirmed this and talked a little bit about this in the comment section, mentioning that the kind of garrison hospital for the defenses in the vicinity of Fort Fisher along the Cape Fear River is going to be about a mile north of the fort itself, which means that when this battle begins and forces of the U.S. Army are actually going to land north of the fort itself. This means that hospital that they've been using and have been using for years they're now cut off from it. And this is not unexpected because the fort itself is meant to be kind of self-sufficient. What this means is that ultimately a temporary, and this is common for battles that are going on outside of fixed defensive positions where you have to establish temporary and sometimes movable field hospitals. But the hospital itself, especially because it's coming under intense bombardment even before the landing, is going to be within the fort itself. And so this is going to show up kind of on the northern end of the fort. At an area, and I love this. I didn't know the name of it until Becky sent along some of this information that she supplied to us. An area known as the Pulpit, which I think is just a great name for a part of this fortification. But basically, that and you can see it here in this photograph, that in these areas built within the fort meant to protect the defenders in an intense bombardment, also to protect the supplies in the fortification, in some cases to protect ammunition as well, that these are going to become makeshift medical facilities. Another photograph, and this is one that is it was sent along by Becky. Thank you so much for sending these. And along with the photograph that she sent along, we have some primary sources. And I have to say, of all of the kinds of primary sources that we use at the museum, the ones that are most, I would say, special to me, the ones that I think are in many cases the most instructive and I find the most fascinating, are those of the wounded. We're a Civil War Medicine Museum. We focus so often on the experiences and the writings of the medical personnel, the surgeons, the nurses, the stewards who are doing the medical care. And some of them write beautifully, give very great descriptions of their work. Others are very analytical, and are very much science, as a doctor might write today, very much just writing what they're seeing, and not necessarily dwelling on the what they're experiencing. But what I find is you get so much about what the Civil War was like from the experience of those who were wounded. What it was like to be shot, what it was like to have typhoid fever, what it was like to have a shell explode over your head. Those experiences really help to describe the Civil War.
And I think that's important too, for the impact, that it's important that we understand the consequences of this conflict. That's really what this museum is about. There are many museums that explore individual battles and why they were important. And I'm not saying that they're wrong in doing so. It's important that we have that story, but the consequences of war really are driven home through the stuff that Jake is talking about. And your support helps us to tell those stories. I do want to give a quick shout out to Susan Wernersbach, who just became a member here at this museum during this video. Members like you help us to continue telling these stories, to really give this important message to the public. So thank you, Susan, for your support. If any of you out there want to join her in supporting, check the description below. We've got a support link down there.
All right, so thank you so much for all of you for supporting the museum. Now into this account. This is from John Moorhead Johnston, 36th North Carolina, 2nd Heavy Artillery, Company H. What I was struck by with this account, and this might be because I am reading not a lot about Civil War medicine in my outside of work. I'm reading quite a bit about World War I at the moment, and I was really struck by how much this sounds like some of the fighting and descriptions the wounded soldiers have of World War I. I think you'll probably be able to get that reference as to why I was thinking that when I read this. Quote, "It was on the evening of the third day of the fight, January 15th, that I was struck on the left arm by a piece of timber, knocking my gun from my hand, almost completely covering me up with dirt and taking the skin off my arm. At the same time, a piece of shell struck me on the head. While I was not seriously, I was painfully hurt, so much so that I could take no further part in the fight. I went at once to Dr. Willis, who had a temporary hospital and was caring for the wounded. He was also an officer in our company. I told him that I was hurt and not able to stay in the fight. He told me, all right, he needed someone to assist him, so I stayed and helped him until I surrendered at about 10 o'clock that night. I stayed there for the rest of the night and slept very little." Now he goes on to talk about there's a very infamous moment in the story of Fort Fisher, that the day after the garrison is surrendered, a powder magazine actually explodes within the fort and is going to kill a huge number of those who have been captured in the fort, as well as Union personnel who were celebrating the capture of Fort Fisher and this closing of Wilmington, this crucial strategic moment in the Civil War. And he goes on to talk about that. But where he is being treated is inside these kind of ramparts of this particular part of the fort. And there was a great sketch that was done, and this is going to be my last kind of image here. And you can actually see this is from Boston College, from their collection. And this is a sketch that is done showing an example in the defenses of Wilmington of a hospital that is going to be within these kinds of fortifications. You can see, again, you can see the wooden planks, if you'll note some of the wooden planks there, showing these are not the ideal places for Civil War hospitals. I will note, by the time we get to 1865, it is very well understood that the most sanitary hospitals are those with good airflow that can be kept clean. A facility like this, as makeshift as it is pretty much the opposite of what is desired by Civil War medical practitioners at this stage in the conflict. They are crying for fresh air, good airflow, cleanliness. And a fortification like this, in a medical facility like this, is not going to be an ideal place for wounded soldiers to be taken. Now, wounded from this engagement are going to be mostly evacuated because they're going to all fall. Those in Fort Fisher are going to fall into Union military hands. They're going to become prisoners of war. They're going to be taken north up the Atlantic seaboard into the Chesapeake Bay. Many of them are going to be taken to the area around Point Lookout, Maryland, which is going to be Hammond General Hospital, which is named for the Surgeon General of the U.S. Army. And for the Confederate wounded, and those who are sick, once they are well enough to be transferred out of the hospital, they're going to be taken just up the road to a prisoner of war camp that was also located at Point Lookout. So a little bit about about that experience. They're going to be taken on board ships, ultimately going to be shipped off. Many cases that they're not going to transport patients, Union or Confederate, until they're stable enough to be transported. So makeshift facilities at Fort Fisher are going to be used in the days and weeks that follow the battle until the patients are ready to be moved. Now, one other thing I want to note here, and that is that we've been talking about Fort Fisher specifically here. There's a great blog post on our website that was written. Let me pull it up here.
I'm a little surprised I don't know about this.
Yeah. So this is written by David Silkenat, who has been a great scholar. We've had him on the live streams on Facebook in the past. Let me pull it up. So he wrote a book recently about the surrender surrender in the Civil War. He has a book published, but he has a blog post on our website. This is from 2017, how a yellow fever outbreak exacerbated the Civil War refugee crisis. And this is actually all about a yellow fever epidemic in Wilmington, North Carolina in the summer and early fall of 1862.
How have I not read this?
Yeah.
We have so much on the blog that I still haven't combed through.
Yep. This is a really good one. This has been was amazing for me to read about. It gets down to the experience of what it was like to be in Wilmington during the Civil War, but also specifically during this yellow fever epidemic, which no understanding of what caused yellow fever, how it was supposed to be treated. It was a very dangerous disease. Ultimately, we know now that it's spread by mosquitoes. At the time, They did not know that, did not make that connection. So when a yellow fever epidemic would it take place, people would just flee and get out of the city, which ultimately could be successful, but also help to, unfortunately, spread the disease as well.
Yeah, not unlike smallpox or the plague.
Yes, and not being spread person to person, but being essentially infecting the mosquito population, which then reinfects the people.
I was about to ask, because I know it's not contagious in the same way.
Yes, and yellow fever is one of those really interesting ones, and I highly recommend checking out this blog post. I'll put it into the comments section here in just a bit, but this is the URL up here. But just a note on yellow fever, because there's a crazy story out there. Written actually, I think by the used to be the Chemical Heritage Foundation. I think it's now the Science History Foundation. They have a blog, and one of my favorite blog posts that they have on their site is called "Yellow Fever Fiend." There was actually a Confederate leaning. I'm not sure if he actually participated in the war at all, or if he was just a Southerner living abroad. He was in Bermuda. And living in Bermuda during the Civil War, and came up with this grand idea to basically use biological warfare against the North. And so I guess inspired in part by the idea of like smallpox blankets going back to early colonial time period.
Yeah, General Albemarle, I think it was what's his name? He is a 7 Years' War, French and Indian War. He thought about using smallpox blankets. It's unclear whether he actually did, but he certainly wanted to.
Yeah. So this here it is. I'll pull it up and
Abercrombie, General Abercrombie, 7 Years' War. It's like 1760, I think. And he's thinking about using smallpox blankets against, it's 63. It's Pontiac's Rebellion.
Yeah,
he's thinking about using smallpox blankets to raise the siege on Detroit.
Here is this article. It's from their distillations basically blog. They have articles. But yellow
That's
fever
a great name for their blog, and that is a horrifying image.
Yes, cover image for it. A little bit of an idea of why it's called yellow fever. Get a yellow tongue. You're vomiting black. It is pretty nasty, but this actually relates to this relates to the blockade running and also all of this kind of offshore activity that is taking place during the Civil War. So you can find this I'll put this into the comment section as well, sciencehistory.org. But we think of the Civil War as just happening in the United States, and that is very far from the truth. There is a whole global story to the Civil War, which is fascinating diplomatic history, the construction of blockade runners, of other ships that are used. USS Alabama is among, or CSS Alabama
Yes, yeah.
is not a United States ship.
I'm the boat guy here, okay?
Yeah, I'll cede the boats to you, Kyle. But
and even in the U.S., we fail to recognize how widespread this is. As you mentioned earlier, I'm really into the Far West. There's this great book by Megan Kate Nelson, Three Cornered War, about the Civil War in the American Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, Colorado. It does reach there. There is blood being spilled there. And beyond mere violence, the political ramifications stretch all the way across the continent, into Mexico, up to Canada. It is a global and continental and national conflict.
Yes, and it's Dr. Blackburn, Luke Blackburn, who's this Confederate-leaning surgeon in Bermuda, who comes up with this idea of using blankets basically rubbed with some of the excretions of victims of a yellow fever epidemic in Bermuda, and sending those on to northern cities. Ultimately, this is as much a story as evil as a biological weapons attack is. Attempt, and this is not going to be the only attempt at kind of what we would refer to as terrorism today. There are other plots that are kind of hatched within the Confederacy or amongst the Confederate Secret Service, plot to essentially burn down New York City by setting multiple hotels on fire. But this attempt is, as evil as it is also, because of the lack of understanding of how diseases function, missed the boat on the fact that sending along yellow fever blankets isn't going to infect anyone. They're probably just going to open up those packages and be like, why are these vomit covered pieces of clothing and blankets, why have they been sent to us from Bermuda? But nevertheless, a very fascinating story, an element that kind of combines some of the things that we've been talking about here. If you all have any questions, so this is the part we're going to get into answering some of your questions. If you
we're getting to about that time.
Yep, we're closing in here on an hour, which is usually where we like to bring these to. And we've had a good comment section going here, and there's about 60 people have been watching with us today, which is fantastic. Excellent. If you are still with us and you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. We have been working, and we're going to continue to add more videos. We're going to be doing about once a month these historic happy hour videos, which will in future, our next one in February is going to be with 10th Ward Distillery, which is a distillery located across the street from the National Museum of Civil War.
I didn't know about that.
Yep,
I get to go to that?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Brinton's Brandy. We're going to be doing a little brandy tasting virtually, and inspiring all of you to go and support a wonderful woman-owned distillery in downtown Frederick, Maryland, which we are very excited to work with them.
And they got great cocktails there. If you ever get the chance to sit at their bar, anything on the menu is a home run.
Yes, I agree. They have some great stuff there, and I haven't gotten a chance to have a cocktail there yet because the pandemic kind of nixed any chance that I had at that, unfortunately. All right, so let's take a look at our comment section here. We've got folks watching from Colorado, of course, Becky from Fort Fisher. I do want to say we are nailing down details on a future live stream with Becky and Fort Fisher State Historic Site in North Carolina. We're going to be detailing in more depth the medical stories that we introduced a little bit today. They have some great collections, as we've already mentioned, some great primary sources, primary documents that they have either in their collection or that they have collected from other sources. Very excited to bring that to you, hopefully in March. So stay tuned to our website, civilwarmed.org, for that. We've got Gene in Byron, New York. We have Pitt History Guy. Chris Grimes as well says, hi guys, got Central Florida here. Andrea Pike's been a long supporter of the museum on these live streams from Kentucky, Charlottesville, Virginia as well, another Western Pennsylvania. Keep going down through Phoenix, Arizona. We have Jeff, whose great grandfather defended Fort Fisher. Amazing personal connection there. Always love those. It helps to inspire us all to learn more about the history. Concord, New Hampshire, Jennifer. But keep on going down here. Oh, Pitt History Guy brings up the Battle of Puebla. Also significantly helped the Anaconda Plan by blocking a French supply route through Mexico until it was too late for the Confederacy. Again, that international aspect of the war.
Right, the Mexican war against France, and then eventually devolving into a civil war. It's a whole thing. We don't have time to get into it here, but that is important.
Yes. Another, this is going to be kind of a question, sort of comment for you to confirm or deny, Mr. Naval History Man. And this comes from Bob Smith. He says, Kyle, isn't it true that under international maritime law, a true blockade couldn't be declared against the Confederacy without recognizing them as a nation? He mentions Craig Simons.
That was a big question at the time. France and Britain especially were wrestling with this idea. We often hear in Civil War history about how France and Britain supported the Confederacy. That's a very reductive way to look at it. It's way more complicated than that. Britain and France had their own goals, especially in Mexico in 1861. And then those goals diverged from each other, making it even more complicated after 1861 when Britain backs out of the invasion of Mexico and actually sort of is against it. It's complicated. But there is actually sort of an international informal tribunal by European powers to decide whether or not they can recognize the blockade. And eventually they settle on kind of, yeah, they can, without formally recognizing the Confederacy as a nation. Again, it's complicated. I recommend James McPherson's War on the Waters. He goes in depth on that and does a good job of exploring like how that shook out. But the short version, TLDR, France and Britain recognized the blockade and the legitimacy of the blockade without actually recognizing the Confederacy as an independent nation. So again, like that's really a short version, but that's eventually what happens.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kyle, for that. We did already answer the morphine question. We have a follow-up to that, which I can take a swipe at. This is from Jamie. Given the availability of opiates, was addiction a problem as well? Yes, very much so. Although the understanding of addiction that we have today is very, very different than the understanding that they had in the mid-19th century. There is a great video. I know I sound like a shill for all of the other content that we have available.
I mean, that's literally your job, though.
That's true. It is my job. But there's another video that we have that goes into this. So if you search in opiates and Civil War med on YouTube here, you'll actually find that video. And we have more information on our Facebook page. We've written about other posts about opiates and their use. Became a major problem in the wake of the Civil War. The first true opiate crisis, if you could call it that, is going to begin to develop in the 1870s and the 1880s. And among the groups that are going to be susceptible to opium addiction are going to be veterans, and many of them get a taste for it. In some cases, are first prescribed it during the Civil War era for Civil War wounds, but also was used widely in the treatment of various diseases during the Civil War era as well. Specifically, one of the most common diseases, dysentery, during the Civil War, opium was widely prescribed for that particular condition. Continue moving on. James Garfield died by careless doctors. His wounds were not fatal. I will tell you, I will let you know, George, that we're going to have a video on just that that topic. Just put in the paperwork for it today. We're going to be doing a live stream, my presentation on how Civil War medicine killed James Garfield. That's going to be coming up on February 12th. So mark your calendars. That'll be over on Facebook. That event should be up on the website probably by early next week. So I'll be giving that presentation, one of my favorite presentations to give, because it does, even though Garfield's assassinated 20 years after the Civil War, very much relates to the medical care administered during the Civil War, and is going to be a crucial moment in the evolution of American emergency medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Good conversation going on about the fort and what remains of it today. And Becky has answered some of those questions. Thank you so much, Becky, for being here. And
you're a superstar, Becky.
Our superstar in the comment section and future star of one of our videos here. We're very excited to work with the folks at Fort Fisher on a future video. Jerry was struck the same way about the battles around Petersburg and the similarity with the Great War. Absolutely. You start getting into when the trenches start being constructed, both in 1864 during the siege of Petersburg. Even before that, too, as the battles are moving in the Virginia sector of the war, from the wilderness all the way down to Petersburg, and all of the trenches and earthworks that are coming in.
I think last March you had a conversation with Jim Taub about this. Jim Taub being a historian of World War I, talking about similarities between the conflicts. And you see that especially in medical care for American forces. You have this sort of leapfrogging effect in military medical history where one nation will get really far ahead and the other nations have to catch up to that. And often they're well behind. Through World War I, American ambulance services are the best because of the Civil War.
Absolutely. And it's really important. This is a big thing that we do at the museum, is to make these comparisons and draw these kinds of conclusions, that we can see these similarities that we see across historical eras, that we can still learn from this history. So like the fact that that the Civil War occurred 160 years ago, we can look back and still see lessons that can be learned in various ways, whether that's in the military side, whether that's the political science side, or in our case, the medical side. There's still a lot of lessons that can be drawn and learned from the Civil War era, the decision making of the time, and having a good grasp of American Civil War history. Civil War medical history is still very influential, even with modern medical practitioners. There's still lessons to be learned here. All right, so we're going to wrap up here, and I can see that we're pretty much got some folks from Utah, Wilmington area, Bradenton, Florida, London, Ontario, Kansas City, center of the border wars. I was actually just talking about bleeding Kansas just the other day.
We are, I'll say this, we are working on a brainstorm right now for a project dealing with John Brown and his legacy in Civil War medical care. And that will touch on bleeding Kansas. As much as we are the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, the Civil War is broader than just 1861 to 1865. And there are things we can learn from the bookend eras surrounding the Civil War. So again, that's a long ways off, but I do want to sort of tease that. We've got something in the works.
Absolutely. We got Dallas, Georgia here. Some other folks and people thanking us. So thank you all for tuning in. We have about 40 folks with us now. Thanks for tuning in with us. You can support the museum in a couple of ways. You can click the thumbs up button if you liked today's video. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content. There's going to be more content coming here. I am planning a series of short videos about DC hospital locations during the Civil War. I live in Washington, DC, and there's some amazing historical sites related to Civil War medicine here in the city. So there's going to be some videos coming on that front, some videos about other hospital locations. And of course, all of the Facebook live streams that we do are also posted here on Facebook. So if you're not a big Facebook user,
you're on YouTube.
What's that?
You said we're on YouTube.
We're on YouTube, but there's lots of videos that
are okay. We're putting a lot of work into this.
Yes, the algorithms do mess us up. So but we have streams going on many social media networks.
True. Instagram
And you can,
and Twitter.
yeah, we're on all places, all of the major social media sites. You can find us, more videos like this. But you can help us most by becoming a member or donating to the museum. That allows you to support content like this. Also going to help us do some more programming outside our walls, in this case of our apartments, and do some more out in the field. So we're planning some trips to battlefields, some of them quite far from our home base in Frederick, Maryland. So you'll be supporting content like that. You're also allowing us to get new technology as well. So new camera equipment, audio equipment, all of those sorts of things that make these videos a little bit better, make the quality better, you know, those kinds of elements, logistics, you are helping to support by becoming a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. So Kyle, you have any last thoughts?
I think you pretty much summed it up. Membership is literally my job. So you'll get a letter that's hand signed by me. Many of you will get a phone call from me saying, hey, thanks so much. So please do that. That helps us. That keeps this museum running.
All right. Well, thank you, Kyle. Thank you, all of you out there, for watching. It's been a great conversation. Very excited to be able to interact with all of you in the comments section here. I see some of you have already subscribed. We've got some new members during this video.
Awesome.
Thank you all so much for your support, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.